Well, here we are at the end of all things, Sam. With all the business of a semester as a teacher, a learner, a researcher, and father, well, me and my guitar have some catching up to do. So here comes my final blog post for our time together. Well, first, I want to review some of the research behind my lesson plan and the lesson plan itself. In the presentation, of course, the point is not to unpack every bit of detail, but I thought I could expand a little bit further here. Second, what the heck did I learn this semester? I have some metacognitive themes that are emerging. And finally, where am I going from here? Well, perhaps we shall meet again. So here we go! Okay, so as you all gathered, my lesson plan was on studying and test taking with UOIT remedial students. Obviously, these students had some difficulty in their last semester, and they have time management issues, which, they readily admit, and it makes sense. So in the beginning of the course, we have to deal with the logistics of planning out a semester before we can get into studying and test taking. After we deal with time management, then we get to studying and test taking, and deal with time management we do, for I used to be an event planner and I know how to plan. Here is a quick shot of a dish count for a Mossport event. Yep, I needed to order 800 plates. I won't show you the staffing sheet, it gives me anxiety, and the linen counts for an event like this with color-coordinated napkins and centerpieces, well, it just makes me want a nappy. Anywho, so we deal with time management in a number of ways. The first thing I like to do is audit. When I was at Trent, I had a cool summer job. We managed all the residence applications the year of the double cohort. Think about that for a second. Grade 12 and OAC were graduating the same year. And were the universities prepared? Nope. So we had to audit the residences, exactly how many beds, desks, chairs, windows, drapes, closets, and square footage for each room. We needed to know down to the last bed because a bed equaled a student paying for residence. And I like auditing. The screen cap here is from our Student Academic Learning Services, which we call SALS. SALS is where you go for anything, really. Don't know how to write a thesis or a well-structured paragraph with a topic sentence? SALS. Need a study group for chemistry? SALS. English as a second language? SALS. Need to prep for a physiology test? SALS. This isn't to say that we don't do things in my class. We do plenty. But SALS is the secret augmenting weapon for a student's scholarship. The screen cap is their time audit. Yes, it's a bit tedious, but after you fill out every little box, it makes a pie chart for your whole week. So you can see where the heck you're spending all your time. And from there, we can make changes. We look at a number of ways that we can map out the semester. I show them my spreadsheet for the course where I map themes, activities, and what in-process items take place. I do this now for every course that I teach, and it's a pain at the start, but then it helps, and it helps me build the content online. Rob knows about this. Our Blackboard for this course is organized in this way. So once I have this map, I'm following it for the semester instead of making things up each week. And we've all been there. Here is a semester map from a student. And this one's pretty good. The next step is to put this into a digital tool that will actually remind us. I like how it's not just due dates, but there's also some gym time in there. If I get these with only due dates, I sometimes push back and say, where are you in all of this? When are you going to the beach this summer? When are you going to play video games? When are you going out with friends for an evening? When can you sleep in once a week? We are not just a series of deadlines. This is working to live versus living to work. West Coasters know this one as well. So I push them to keep working on this and to get it into a calendar with alerts. They're all walking around with these smartphones, but the phones aren't doing any work for them. I ask my students, are you using social media? Or is social media using you? Moving on. I use a brief and informal pre-course survey for my students. And of course, time management is number one. But then they cite studying and test taking is the biggest challenge in their last semester. One student commented, after spending a few weeks with us, quote, "I like the college work we're doing. It feels like projects. Last semester, I didn't do any work, just tests, and I died." Yeah, no kidding, and me too. I already told you how I failed the G1 test years back. Oh brother. So we've done some auditing and mapping, and now the table is set for studying and test taking. So my lesson on studying and test taking is in two parts. And in the first session, we don't even really get to the theme. We really just set the table. And this is important because many of my students have commented that they never knew about the cognitive stuff that we discuss. These topics include information processing. How does information move around in our brains? How do we remember? How do we recall? Where are my car keys? Honey, have you seen my car keys? Now, obviously, information processing is just a model, but tries to sort out the complex and inner workings of our brains. But it's a good starting point, and it also opens the door to the constructivist viewpoint that we must do something with information in order to make it meaningful. I know I'm simplifying, but my students seem to respond. And they are self-described introverts, so when they start probing, I know I'm onto something. Now, of course, our memories are limited, and I bring up cognitive load theory, and there's a quote that I love from Paas et al. It rings true for me. Working memory is limited, and it can only handle no more than 2 or 3 novel interacting elements. If the working memory required for an assignment is more than the available resources of working memory, the cognitive system will collapse. No kidding. So my students with 5 or 6 courses, multiple readings, multiple assignments, friends, hunger, sleep, partying. It's no wonder that studying and test taking can prove daunting. So, now that we have some theory in place, we can get into the things that can help us. Active reading and active listening. Well, suffice it to say, I'm a constructivist, and my opinion is the sooner we make information meaningful to us, the better. If we have a chapter reading, don't just read it. I annotate all of my readings using my iPad. And I demonstrate this to my students. And we look at ways to how to skim read and then review. I look at some abstracts because those are a great example of this. The discussion is augmented by a discussion post on our learning management system where they read about expert learners and then answer in a 3-2-1. That is, what are the 3 main points of the article? What are 2 observations that the students had? Followed by perhaps a point that they thought was unclear or confusing. So we have in-class discussions on this that are augmented with some online learning. Here is a quick example of our discussion forum. I got them to read an excerpt from Ertmer and Newby 1996 and expert learning, and really just queried them on what are the 3 main ideas or things you found interesting, or a couple things that they noticed or observations about the students that were depicted in the reading. And actually, the discussion posts were pretty good. Okay, active listening, well, this is a little more tricky. When we walk down a busy campus hall, we tend to filter out all that noise. So the distinction here is between just hearing a bunch of noise and actually listening to someone and making meaning out of what they are saying. To illustrate this, I use a bunch of musical examples. We often just hear music without really focusing. So we listen to some Beatles, and then we try to name all the different instruments. We then listen to the same Beatles track where McCartney's bass is isolated. There's also some great Led Zeppelin examples of this, like Bonham's drum track from Fool in the Rain. Google that up. It's good listening, and it's good for your brain. The point here is to illustrate the focus it takes to listen critically and to make meaning out of the information that we encounter, let's say, like in a lecture. So with some of those building blocks and theory discussions in place, we just get into note-taking. I know, dull, right? Well, we start with the Cornell note-taking format, but I also get into digital tools like Evernote or Google Docs. I'll keep this part brief because it's really about A, for the students to reflect on how they take notes and figuring out a style or choosing a style that would work best for them. And B, once they've chosen that form, we need to practice. And practice is what comes next. Do you have a note-taking strategy that works for you? Do my students have one? To find out, I go way off on a tangent and I lecture about the universe. I talk of gravity as a force that we cannot measure. We infer its influence by measuring what it does. What is the speed of light, and why can't we travel at the speed of light? Well, the faster we get, the more mass we acquire, so if we're traveling to Mars, it would take so much energy to move us at the speed of light that we would need an infinite amount of energy to move our heavy ship. Who came up with these laws? And darn it, why have we not met any aliens? Now, the topic doesn't really matter. The lecture has been designed strategically. It's got numbers and theories and formulas and scientists. This is all good fodder for a quiz or test. You can see in the notes there, I have the speed of light, but it's not on the slide. I say those numbers aloud, and then I say it again correctly. 299,792,458 meters per second squared. Did you catch it in your notes? Did my students catch it in their notes? We'll come back to that later.
Okay, so I want to take a little tour around Socrative. I've talked a lot about it and written a lot about it, but I haven't actually toured it. So one of the things I want to point out here is when my students go to use this, they're going to be logging in as teachers, not students. The student interface is extremely limited. It's really for them to arrive at my room, which is Parsons 12, and then I administer the quiz. So when I'm giving a quiz, I'm the teacher, they're the student. It's accessible through really any technology. But for students to actually use the features, they're going to be creating their own teacher account, which I kind of like that because it's pretty obvious flipped classroom. So when students log into the teacher interface, they can create quizzes. Now I've created a bunch of quizzes already. For instance, I have a APA quiz from another class. So students could go in here and create a bunch of different questions related to whatever subject they're studying. And so that's the quiz creation part of it, and that's great. There's also a lot of reporting that's generated. You can see I've run this a bunch of times, and I can get a whole whack of information about correct versus incorrect, I guess. And so that's helpful as well. So if you think about it, students can come in here and create these quizzes, but really it's when they launch them, they can do things with each other. They can sit in a study room and maybe one of them would create the quiz and test their peers, and then they rotate, however they want to use it. They choose their quiz, but really it's the launching of the quiz that's really cool. So they can do like a space race. They can use an APA quiz or whatever quiz it may be, and they can set up teams. So you could have, I don't know, 3 different study groups in a biology class, for example. They can have their names there. They can shuffle the questions. So when they do the reporting, they can show the final score. The reporting can continue them to, compete with each other because, John did really well in the first 3 tests and Sarah did great on the other 3 tests, and they can actually build their own sort of little bit of game-based learning here where they can compete with one another. So that's sort of how I hope that they continue to use it in terms of not just building a quick quiz, but actually competing with one another.
So at the beginning of the second lesson, we take a few minutes, we review our notes. Were they effective for studying? We drop that quiz on them. And the point is to openly discuss and see if we can remember anything from our notes. This brings us to the actual theme of the lesson, beginning with studying. Sure, there are a ton of resources I have on this. The point is not to bombard my students with too many things. I want them to construct their own practices after all. There are two main points to this discussion. The first harkens back to our previous discussion about memory. Most importantly, don't binge study. We can't retain much after a certain period of time. Secondly, we should definitely map out our studying. Remember that my students also have a challenge of time management. Don't we all? So we get into study plots with some reading in the morning, maybe some reading in the evening, maybe a quick quiz before we wrap it up for the day. I give them this template so they can play with it themselves. And this template, by the way, was kind of created in a class with a bunch of students in a previous semester. I pulled up a spreadsheet to prove that incremental studying was possible, and this is the sort of basic version that we came up with. And now we're at the crux of the heart of darkness, test taking. Well, I'm not going to walk us through everything because there is really just too much stuff. We do explore different test taking formats and unpack tips for multiple choice. If you're stuck, eliminate the obviously wrong answer first and then whittle it down. How many points is the short answer question worth? 5 points? Well, how would you construct that answer? Why should we read the whole test from start to finish when we begin? Well, because question 18 may provide a clue or answer to question 30. Not all tests are perfectly designed. In any case, we do explore a lot of these ideas, but most importantly, we focus on what we should do before, during, and after the test. Our course textbook has a bunch of tips and activities for each stage. So our lesson here is primarily concerned with deliberate practice and studying before a test. And then here we go again. We practice again, and the practice lecture I give is on one of my favorite topics.
So, to practice once again, yippee, I'm going to talk about World War II. I couldn't possibly cover World War II in a mini lecture, that's not the point, but I did want to briefly go through, I've got a picture of a Panzer tank, and I have no notes on the front slide, but you can see here I've got all kinds of links to Wikipedia. I've got numbers. I actually set the context before World War II and bring up the Treaty of Versailles. I also talk about Vimy Ridge. So I've got numbers and figures and lots of links, and I have, numbers are in my notes, casualties, Treaty of Versailles, when it was, $5 billion in reparations. Then we get into the Beer Hall Putsch of 1923 and the rise of Hitler. So, and Hitler's accomplices. This is interesting because in the questions that they designed, the students actually went after this idea and posed a couple of questions like, if Göring was the architect of the economic rebound of Germany after the Treaty of Versailles, and Goebbels was propaganda, and Himmler was largely one of the architects of the Holocaust. They actually asked questions about this, which was really, really interesting. And we also get into a little bit of philosophy, and I talk about Mein Kampf and Hitler's view of history being a struggle of races, not just classes. And we do talk about concentration camps and the Holocaust. And I bring up liberation in D-Day. So it's about 20 minutes. Again, the point is not to cover World War II, but it's to have a lively conversation that has numbers and dates and war strategies and people and things that would, make good fodder for a test.
So with all of this in place and another lecture to practice, my students expect me to test them again, right? Right. But I'm not gonna. They are gonna form into teams and create 2 to 3 questions for Socrative. This went really well, and we had over 30 questions. I don't edit the questions. I want them to see what they created, and the class gets really, really judgmental. That question isn't fair. Why would you ask it that way? What a stupid question. It's quite funny, actually. So my inspiration for this approach comes from Jonason's cognitive tools. I can design tests and quizzes until the cows come home, but how does that really help them become independent learners? Beyond this, my inspiration is actually musical. I'm a musician, and I recently had a discussion with a family member who was curious about how I got started in music, and it was actually nice to reflect. I've been in music since they handed us a recorder. You remember those funny little flutes that they gave us? And they use recorders on the intro to Stairway to Heaven, by the way. In grade 1, they gave us a recorder. I could play Hot Cross Buns and Ode to Joy. You probably did this as well. Later in grade 4, I got this old 20-key organ. The organ had all the names of the notes on the keys. And I figured out that the notes on the recorder could be transferred to the little organ. I then played Ode to Joy on the little organ. Transfer of learning, anyone? Mom put me into piano lessons. ASAP. So flash forward to grade 8 and going into grade 9, I have 4 years of piano and theory under my belt, and my friend Miles shows me a guitar. Another important leap. He knew nothing of theory, and I had never touched a guitar. But guess what? Those chords he was playing, those chords that he really knew nothing about, well, those chords were the same as the scales and chords that I was playing on the guitar. Another transfer of learning. And it ruined my piano playing, and I became a guitar player. Hence all the Beatles and Led Zeppelin references. From then on, I became self-taught. Sure, I've got a great foundation in piano and Royal Conservatory of Music. I've even got my theory, grade 2 and grade 3. But I haven't had a music lessons since I was about 13. So this brings me back to something I'm really interested in. I'm interested in continuous, deliberate practice. And that's what my hope is for the lesson. Now, this idea of deliberate practice came to me via Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, but really in that chapter, he points to the study from Erickson, Krumpe, and Tesh Romer, 1993. And they looked at piano and violin students who were moving from being really good to becoming experts or masters or the best of the best. And they looked at study and practice habits. It's a very cool article. So if I'm self-taught and perhaps have logged my 10,000 hours, and we can deliberately practice music, can we not also deliberately practice studying and test taking? Is that not the point? To keep practicing? Not only do I want my lessons to be well designed and in such a way that Dirksen would approve, but I also ask myself this important question. Can my students take it with them? Is the use of Socrative, where students get to practice and get this tool that they can take with them, did we hit the mark on the head with this one? Whew! I want to unpack a few things from the course and the semester overall. I make my students reflect, and I'm a reflective blue, if any of you know the True Colors self-assessment. So here goes. Delivery is key, no matter how good the lesson plan may be. And I think that this is what I've been building really over the last few years. Not just a collection of tricks or digital tools or fun yet superficial activities. I'm building my own methodology for teaching. It happens to be more well-informed and more well-read as of late as a result of this program. But I think that that's what I'm building. And what I'm up to in my lectures is starting to get a little high-flying and elaborate. You're welcome to sit in anytime. I'm constantly flipping between tools and whiteboards, and we're always around the room, and I often break up those lateral desks into islands for teamwork. Now I wonder what my associate dean will think in my next performance review. Number 2, I'm starting to synthesize the theories and readings and ideas into lesson design. Clearly, we all enjoyed the Dirksen book, but that also led me to the Russian fellow whose name we cannot pronounce, and flow theory. I'm more aware of cognitive load, and because of this, I put in brain breaks. I try to factor that into my lesson plans. And this is related to how I'm building my methodology. Number 3, I don't really make lesson plans. What I normally do is use my map, make an agenda. Now, I'm not going to make elaborate lesson plans for every class, but I think I'm going to start using an abridged version of what we did in this class, at least to establish the learning goals, maybe list the tools, and definitely better manage the time. I do like an open class where my students could potentially hijack the agenda and we could end up discussing the details of an assignment or really any topic that they're into, but I still should schedule it out. So, what is the larger theme? I'm wrapping all of this stuff into my practice. Well, here we are. Not only have these blogs unpacked course readings and assignments and lesson plans, but also some personal and embarrassing things like failing my G1 and G2 driving tests. My takeaway here is going to throw back to last September. I began the program with 2 really great foundational courses, Bill's Principles of Learning and Lorraine's Curriculum Planning and Implementation. And I had no idea what I was in for. But as I got going, I started to wage this battle from my desk, one thing at a time. One reading, one discussion post. Oh, more readings. One page of a paper, one quotation, one reference, one style guide, one group presentation, one blog. This stuff all adds up, and it becomes a body of work. So I don't know where all this is going, but I'm going to take Research Methods 1 in the fall and Advanced Research Methods in the winter. So what does all that mean? Well, maybe all this, one small step at a time, these are the building blocks to build a body of work, and it will begin with a thesis. We shall see. All right. My backyard is calling, the summer is bright, my kid and wife are calling, and the dog needs a walk. Thank you all very much for a great semester. Thank you, Rob, for running the show. 'Twas well organized, lots of good work, and it helped us build our little tender ships to sail the seas of the show that never ends, education. Be well, everyone. Cheers.